and Gatta wall is what it's being described as. Murray, Father's Day yesterday was people hugging across bollards. It's a bizarre scene in Australia. Is the biggest failure of the Queensland state government the inability to get Queenslanders home and operate a proper border bubble?
Well, I think that's a really one-sided way to look at this issue, Tom. Obviously, no one liked to see those scenes that we saw at the border yesterday. They were very distressing. I can only imagine the distress that was involved for anyone who was there trying to see their father or their grandfather on Father's Day. But I know for a fact that the Queensland government has been trying to get the New South Wales government to engage on having a proper border bubble that would allow people to travel more freely, for instance, between the Tweed and the Gold Coast. The Queensland government has been trying that for weeks now and has been unable to make progress with the New South Wales government. So I have noticed that the Prime Minister and some media outlets, to be frank, have wanted to focus exclusively on what the Queensland government has or hasn't done. I'd like to see a little bit more scrutiny of the New South Wales government as well.
So what about what the Queensland government, and this is clearly its responsibility, not letting its own citizens back either via hotel quarantine, but the more viable solution longer term or even now, which is letting people isolate at home, which South Australia is doing. This far into a pandemic, this is dropping the ball, isn't it?
Well, obviously, it's up to the Queensland government to make its decisions based on health advice about what kind of quarantine arrangements it's prepared to allow happen. But let's not forget that the reason the Queensland government was forced to close down hotel quarantine for a period of time is because the Prime Minister has completely failed to build purpose-built quarantine stations. This is why since January this year, the Queensland government has been trying to get the federal government to build a quarantine station at Wellcamp. Federal Labor has supported that from day one.
It's also because Queensland has decided to make all its residents return to hotel quarantine, which many other states aren't doing. That's the difference here.
Well, again, if you're fair about this and you look at all states and not just cherry pick, there's a number of states that have similar arrangements to Queensland in requiring people to go into hotel quarantine. And the big gap that we have.
Is there another state where you've got thousands that can't get back there?
Well, it's no surprise that Queensland, more than any other state, is the state that people have been wanting to move to. The reason that the hotels in Queensland filled up was that you had so many people, particularly from Sydney, but also Melbourne, wanting to escape the situation in those states. And that's a testament to the great work that the Queensland government has done.
Well, we're talking about residents in a lot of cases. Jared, I want to ask you about QR codes. Police still either using these or accessing them in some cases to try to solve crimes. This isn't going to help people using them?
Yeah, I agree, Tom. Look, you know, QR codes for testing and tracing, testing and tracing with COVID is one thing, but then to break the public's trust and to use it for another reason, I don't think, you know, it is in the best interest of trying to get on top of COVID, especially since I think testing and tracing is the long-term way forward. Unlike quarantine centres, which, you know, you can't put people into quarantine every time they cross a border for 2 weeks. It's just unsustainable long term. So going forward, you know, rapid testing and tracing is the way forward.
Right. So on QR code, why wasn't a proper agreement done at National Cabinet? It seems it was another rubbery one. I think 2 states have actually done something about it legislation-wise. Doesn't the federal government need to make sure this Friday, hey, you've all got to do this, we need to make this system work?
Well, look, I mean, my understanding is the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over this. But, you know, if they do, and I'm happy to say that, you know, that they can take responsibility, is that ultimately the data shouldn't be used by the police because it's a breach of trust. Now, you know, I mean, my own personal view is our private data is pretty much out there anyway. But if the government says one thing, then it should stick to that. And I'm talking about state governments here because they're the ones with the QR tracing code testing. So
Murray, the Queensland unicameral government could get this done in a jiffy if it wanted to. Should it pass clear laws, meaning police cannot use QR codes to try to solve crimes?
Well, I think clearly if these sort of powers are being given to police, there need to be adequate safeguards put in place there. I think that QR codes were introduced.
What do you mean? That they should have the power to use them?
No, I'm saying that QR codes were introduced for a reason, and that was to trace individuals to alert them to possible COVID outbreaks. That's the reason that the QR codes were
right, we're talking about other crimes. Should that be clear that they shouldn't be able to use it for anything else?
That's what I'm saying. If these powers are being used beyond the original intention, then I think there is some room for government to take some action there.